Today we will read The Fantastic Flying Books of Mr. Morris Lessmore by William Joyce. I will point out a couple of vocabulary words as we find them in our book, but the first one I would like to mention is happenstance. I'm going to mention it before we read the book. The word happenstance means that something just happens without cause, without reason. It just happens. Now, before we start, take a look at our book. Look at the cover of our book. What do you think might be Mr. Morris Lessmore's favorite activity? I agree, it looks like he enjoys reading. So we're going to find out all about his fantastic flying books. Right, so let's start. Morris Lessmore loved words. He loved stories. He loved books. His life was a book of his own writing, one orderly page after another. He would open it every morning and write of his joys and his sorrows, of all that he knew and everything that he hoped for. But every story has its upsets. And one day, the sky darkened. The winds blew and blew, till everything Morris knew was scattered, even the words of his book. He didn't know what to do or which way to go, so he just began to wander and wander. Then a happy bit of happenstance came his way. Rather than looking down as he had become his habit, Morris Lessmore looked up, and drifting through the sky above him, Morris saw a lovely lady. She was being pulled by a festive squadron of flying books. Morris wondered if his book could fly, so he gave it a try. But it couldn't. It would only fall to the ground with a depressing thud. The flying lady knew that Morris simply needed a good story, so she sent him her favorite. The book was an amiable fellow and urged Morris to follow him. Now this is another word we're going to look at, amiable. Can you tell me, by looking at the illustration of our book, amiable fellow, what amiable might mean? Can you tell by the picture, by looking at him, what it might mean? What's it say about his personality? Yes, that's right. He looks friendly, doesn't he? Amiable means friendly or pleasant. So this book, this friendly book, is now going to lead Morris. He led him to an extraordinary building where many books apparently nested. Morris slowly walked inside and discovered the most mysterious and inviting room he had ever seen. It was filled with the fluttering of countless pages, and Morris could hear the faint chatter of 1,000 different stories. Each book was whispering an invitation to adventure. That sounds like my kind of room. Then his new friend flew up and landed on his arm. It held itself open as if hoping to be read. And so, Morris's life among the books began. Morris tried to keep the books in some sort of order, but they always mixed themselves up. The tragedies needed cheering up and would visit the comedies. The encyclopedias, weary of facts, would relax with the comic books and fictions. All in all, it was an agreeable jumble. Morris found great satisfaction in caring for the books, gently fixing those with fragile bindings and unfolding the dog-eared pages of others. Now that's another word I want to look at, dog-eared. Do you know what dog-eared means? If we have a piece of paper and we just fold down its corner, it kind of looks like a dog ear. But if that paper If we take a page of a book and fold it down to mark our place, and that crease stays, it will end up wearing out and that corner will fall off. It's very important that we always take good care of our books, library books, and our own personal books. And that's what Morris did. He took care of all these books, some who had not been handled quite gently enough. And sometimes Morris would become lost in a book as he read and scarcely emerge for days. Have you ever been lost in a book? Do you know what it means to be lost in a book? To be so caught up in the story that you can't hear what's going on around you. You don't notice what's going on. You're just so lost in your story. It's like you're there. And that's what happened to Morris as he read his stories. Morris liked to share the books with others. Sometimes it was a favorite that everyone loved, and other times he found a lonely little volume whose tale was seldom told. Everyone's story matters, said Morris, and all the books agreed. At night, after all the stories that needed telling had been told, and everyone had settled down to their proper places on the shelves, the great big dictionary would get in the last word. Oh, good night. It was then that Morris Lessmore would once again write in his own book. He wrote of his joys and his sorrows, and of all that he knew, and everything that he hoped for. The days passed, and so did the months. And then years passed, and years. And Morris Lessmore became stooped and crinkly. Now, how would you describe someone? Instead of saying stooped and crinkly, what word would you use? We might say that they're old or elderly. That's right. But our author described him as stooped and crinkly. And you can see he's much older. His hair is gray. But the books, they didn't care. And they never changed. Their stories stayed the same. And now his old friends took care of him the way he once cared for them. And they read themselves to him each night. Then one day, he filled the last page in his book. He looked up and said with a bittersweet sigh, I guess it's time to move on. Now this word bittersweet, it means sad and happy at the same time. Now, why might this be a bittersweet moment for Morris? Yeah, he's finished his book. He was able to complete it. He was happy he could complete his book, but now he's sad that he must move on. The books were sorry, but they understood. Morris put on his hat and took his cane. As he went to the door, he turned and he smiled. Then he waved goodbye. I'll carry you all in here, he said as he pointed to his heart. The books waved their pages and Morris Lessmore flew away. And as he flew, he changed back to the way he had been that long ago day when they had all first met. The books were quiet for a while. Then they noticed that Morris Lessmore had left something behind. It's his book, his oldest friend said. Inside was Morris's story. All his joys and his sorrows, all that he knew, and everything that he had hoped for. But then the books heard a small expectant sound, and there in the doorway was a little girl. She looked around with wonder, and then something fantastic happened. Morris Lessmore's book flew up to her and opened its pages. Now what made the difference? In Morris's book, why can it now fly when it couldn't earlier when Morris tried? What do you think might be the difference? What changed? Well, the girl began to read, and so our story ends as it began, with the opening of a book. So, what do you suppose, let's go back to this page. What do you suppose the author meant when he said that everything Morris knew was scattered, even the words of his book? When we have a storm, like the storm came in Morris's story, it says that the words blew off of his page. But words don't really blow off of a page when we have a storm. So what do you think he meant that even the words of his book were scattered? The book and all the words represent Morris's life. So when all of that was scattered, his life was scattered and he didn't know where to go. Now, I have one more question. Morris had said that everyone's story matters. Can you explain to me what might be the deeper meaning of Morris's statement that everyone's story matters? That's right. It means that everyone's life is important. Each of us are like a book with pages to be filled every day, and everyone's story is important.